Red and blue lights flashed as tires screeched against the asphalt, the sedan sliding to a tense stop. "Step out of the car! Now!" the officer shouted, slamming his hand against the hood. "What did I do?" she asked, tension rising in her chest. "I saw you dealing," he spat, eyes scanning for witnesses. "You're going away for a long time." Another cruiser pulled up behind, headlights cutting across the scene. A pair of uniformed officers stepped out, shifting uneasily as if they weren't certain they wanted to be here. Other officers glanced nervously, waiting for her to react. Jasmine Hayes didn't flinch. She could feel the tension crawling across her skin, the way danger does when it wears the mask of authority. But they had no idea who they were messing with. She was Senator Jasmine Hayes, leader of a federal anti-corruption task force, and today she was about to turn the tables in ways they couldn't imagine. What would you do if someone tried to ruin your life, only to realize you held all the power? Comment below, and subscribe to see how courage and justice win every time. Jasmine Hayes didn't flinch. She could feel the tension crawling across her skin, the way danger does when it wears the mask of authority. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the woman standing before them was not just another late-night traffic stop. She was a United States Senator. And not just that. She was chairing a federal task force that had been quietly unraveling the very network these men thought they controlled. But they believed they had the upper hand tonight. The night hadn't started this way. Hours earlier, Jasmine had stood in her office surrounded by case files and encrypted reports. Her team scattered across state lines following trails of money, shipments, and dirty names that showed up too often in the wrong places. She had dressed carefully for the morning ahead, a meeting with federal prosecutors, senior officers, and community leaders. Her goal was simple but dangerous: cut the head off a drug network that had been poisoning neighborhoods for years. She fastened her dark navy blazer, the one that carried quiet authority, and slid her notes into a leather portfolio. Before stepping out, she paused by the framed photograph on her desk. Her father's eyes stared back at her, stern but proud, a reminder of why she fought. He'd been one of the first black police captains in the city, a man who had known both respect and resistance in equal measure. "You'd have wanted this," she whispered to the photograph before closing the door behind her. The drive was supposed to be uneventful, a straight shot to the federal building downtown. Instead, a sudden flash of lights in her rearview mirror had signaled a detour into something darker. Now she stood on the pavement, heels firm against the concrete, as the officer's accusation hung heavy in the air. "You think you can walk around here like you're better than everyone else?" His tone dripped with disdain. "I know your kind, always hiding behind power, thinking you're untouchable." Jasmine tilted her chin upward, eyes unblinking. "You don't know who I am." "Oh, I know exactly who you are." He leaned in closer, voice dropping. "You're just another dealer pretending to be clean. And tonight, I've got you." The other officers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. One muttered under his breath, "This doesn't feel right." "Shut up," the leader snapped. "Cuff her." The cold bite of metal clamped around her wrists as she was forced against the hood of her own car. She could feel the tremor in one officer's hands as he secured the cuffs, as though he, too, was questioning what they were doing. "You're making a mistake," Jasmine said quietly, not to plead, but to warn. "No!" the leader sneered. "I'm making history." They pushed her toward the waiting cruiser, ignoring her portfolio that had slipped onto the pavement, its pages scattering like fallen leaves. Inside those pages were names, timelines, and evidence that connected dots the public didn't yet see. Evidence that pointed directly at the very man now parading her as a criminal. The door slammed shut, and the car lurched forward. As the city streets blurred by, Jasmine's mind stayed razor-sharp. She had known the risks of taking on this case. She had seen the reports of intimidation, the sudden disappearances, the inexplicable reassignment of honest officers who had gotten too close. Tonight wasn't an accident. It was retaliation. But if they thought a pair of handcuffs could silence her, they had no idea who they were dealing with. At the station, The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over peeling paint and worn linoleum. The booking desk clerk looked up, confusion flashing across his face when he saw who was being escorted in. "This is Senator Hayes," he stammered. "Not tonight, she isn't," the arresting officer snapped. "Tonight, she's just another junkie trying to play smart." Jasmine stood tall, her wrists still bound, her eyes locking onto the clerk. "Call your captain," she said evenly. The officer shoved her forward. "No calls, no special treatment." But the clerk hesitated, his fingers hovering over the phone. He had seen enough in his years behind that desk to recognize when something reeked of politics more than justice. "Do as you're told," the officer barked. The clerk lowered his hand reluctantly, but his eyes followed Jasmine with an expression that said this wasn't over. Down the corridor, she was led past holding cells that smelled of sweat and despair. Men pressed their faces against the bars, whispering curses and prayers as she walked by. She did not look away. In the interrogation room, they sat her down on a cold metal chair, the cuffs still digging into her skin. The lead officer leaned against the table, smirking as if he had already won. "You've been a problem for a long time," he said, "asking too many questions. Poking around where you don't belong." "I belong exactly where I am," she replied. "Not anymore." He leaned closer, his voice laced with venom. "You'll be forgotten by morning. Just another scandal, another headline. The city will turn on you. And when they do, your little task force dies with you." Jasmine let the silence hang for a moment, then met his gaze with unshakable calm. "You've made a dangerous miscalculation." For the first time, the smirk faltered. Because beneath her composed exterior, Jasmine Hayes already knew his secret. She had the names, the transfers, the ledgers disguised as police overtime reports. She had been one step away from pulling the curtain back completely. And now, in his arrogance, he had dragged her right into the lion's den, where the truth would be forced into the light. The steel chair groaned beneath her as she shifted slightly, the cuffs still biting into her wrists. Across the table, the lead officer leaned back, savoring every second of control. His smile was the kind worn by men who thought themselves invincible. "You know what happens next?" His tone was casual, as if he were explaining routine paperwork. "We charge you. The news cameras arrive. You get paraded out in front of them. All those headlines you've been chasing, now they'll chase you." Jasmine held his gaze, unblinking. "And when the truth comes out?" He laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Truth? The truth is whatever badge carries it. And tonight, that's me." His confidence was rehearsed, built on years of people being too afraid or too powerless to challenge him. But there was something else hiding in his voice. Desperation. The door opened, and one of the younger officers entered with a clipboard. He hesitated before speaking. We logged the vehicle. Didn't find anything." The lead officer's jaw tightened. "Search again." "We did," the younger man said, shifting nervously. "There's nothing in the car. Not even—" "Then you missed it," the leader snapped. "Check the trunk, the seats, hell, check the tires if you have to." The younger officer nodded quickly and hurried out. Jasmine tilted her head. "It must be frustrating," she said softly, "when the story doesn't match the evidence." His eyes narrowed. "You think this is a game?" "I think you've been running one for a long time," she answered. The silence stretched, heavy with meaning. He broke it with a sneer, rising to his feet. "Enjoy the cell. I'll be back when I have what I need." Two officers escorted her down another corridor, their grip firm but less aggressive than before. The station smelled faintly of bleach, but underneath lingered the unmistakable odor of fear. Fear of exposure, fear of being caught in someone else's downfall. The cell door clanged shut behind her. Inside, the space was small, the bench cold steel. A flickering light above buzzed in protest, making shadows dance across the walls. She sat, posture straight, refusing to let the moment bend her. From the cell across the hall, a weary voice spoke. "They don't usually bring senators down here." Jasmine turned slightly. A middle-aged man sat on the bench, his eyes bloodshot, his hands folded in his lap. "They don't usually arrest senators," she replied. He chuckled bitterly. "Guess they must be scared of you." The words lingered. Yes, they were scared. That was the only explanation for a stunt this reckless. Hours passed slowly, marked only by the occasional shuffle of boots down the hallway. One officer brought her water, setting it down without meeting her eyes. Another glanced at her cell with a flicker of something close to guilt. It wasn't long before the younger officer returned, his voice low as he spoke to the leader, just outside her cell. "We didn't find anything. Not in the car, not on her, nothing." "She had to have it," the leader hissed. "She's connected to this. She's been sniffing around for months." The younger man's voice dropped further, almost a whisper. "Maybe she's clean." The leader's hand slammed against the bars. "She's not clean. Don't you get it? People like her don't stay clean. They pretend, and I'm not about to let her ruin everything we've built." Jasmine watched, her face unreadable, but inside the words confirmed everything she needed. "We've built, not the city, the department, the force. We." His slip was all the proof she required. He wasn't protecting the law. He was protecting a network. His network. Another officer, older and more weathered, approached cautiously. His voice was quiet, respectful. "With all due respect, sir, this doesn't feel right. If word gets out that we've got her in here without cause..." The leader cut him off. "Word won't get out. Not unless one of you decides to open your mouth. And if you do, you'll be out of a job before the sun comes up." The hallway fell silent. The younger men shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke again. Fear was a powerful gag. Hours later, Jasmine was led into another room. This one was meant for photographs. The camera flashed as they took her mugshot, the sterile click of the shutter punctuating the humiliation. "Face forward. Turn to the side. Next." The fingerprint ink was cold against her skin, staining her fingertips. The booking officer looked at her with a mixture of pity and unease. He knew who she was. Everyone here did. As they escorted her back toward the cells, she spoke, her voice calm but carrying enough weight to halt their steps. "You realize that everything you're doing tonight will be scrutinized. Every word, every action, every lie." One of them swallowed hard, but the leader only smirked. "That's the difference between us, Senator. You believe in scrutiny. I believe in survival." They shoved her back into the cell and locked the door. The hours crawled. In the distance, a phone rang, unanswered. Somewhere down the hall, someone shouted before being silenced. She leaned back against the wall, breathing evenly, her mind piecing together the larger picture. They wanted to bury her because she was too close. They wanted to brand her a criminal because she had uncovered criminals in uniform. But they hadn't anticipated one thing. She wasn't alone in this fight. And soon someone she trusted would walk through those very doors, demanding answers they could no longer control. Act 2 ended not with defeat, but with the tightening coil of a trap they had set for her, one that was already snapping shut on them instead. The hours inside the cell stretched like rope pulled to its breaking point. Time had no rhythm here, only the shuffle of boots and the occasional clang of steel against steel. Jasmine remained seated, her back straight against the cold wall, her wrists red from the cuffs that had been too tight for too long. The station seemed alive with unease. She noticed the patterns, how the younger officers avoided her gaze, how the older ones muttered in corners, how silence fell whenever the leader stepped into the hall. Corruption had a smell, and she could sense it here, the sweat of men who knew they were complicit in something rotten. Across the corridor, the man with the bloodshot eyes leaned closer to the bars. "They don't like you," he said, his voice raspy from sleeplessness. "But they're scared of you." She studied him. "Why do you say that?" "Because they don't treat regular folks this way. Regular folks they just beat, book, and forget. You? They're pacing like men guarding a powder keg." Jasmine gave a faint nod. "Maybe they should be scared." The man chuckled, then coughed. "Careful. Men like that don't play fair. They never do, she replied. The leader returned not long after, his swagger sharpened, but his eyes carried the faint shadow of frustration. He slammed a file down on the desk outside her cell. Funny thing, he said loudly enough for the hallway to hear, your car came up clean. But you know what? I don't need drugs to put you away. Resisting arrest, interfering with an investigation, abuse of power. You're going down, Senator, one way or another. She rose slowly from the bench, walking to the bars with the deliberate calm of someone who refused to be broken. You sound desperate. His jaw tightened. You sound like someone who hasn't realized where she is. Oh, I've realized, she said evenly. I'm in the center of your operation, and you've made the mistake of locking me inside it. A flicker of unease passed through the hallway. One of the younger officers turned his head away, as though hiding the truth on his face. The leader noticed and snapped at him. What are you looking at? Get back to work. Jasmine stepped closer to the bars. Her voice was soft but carried authority that silenced the corridor. Every network has weak links, and I already know yours. You're sloppy with money, sloppy with shipments, sloppy with fear. You're not the first man who thought power made him untouchable, but you'll be remembered like all the others, caught by your own arrogance. His smirk wavered just for a second. Then he leaned in, eyes flashing with anger. Careful, Senator. You're not in a courtroom. You're in my house now. She smiled faintly. Every house has doors, and mine are already opening. The exchange rattled him more than he cared to admit. He stalked off, barking orders at the others. But Jasmine noticed the ripple it left behind. Doubt had settled into the cracks of his command. Hours later, another officer, a broad-shouldered man with weary eyes, approached her cell quietly. His voice was low, almost a whisper. I know who you are, and I know what you're doing. She met his gaze steadily. Then you also know what they're doing. He nodded once. We've all known. Some of us have tried to fight it. Most just keep our heads down. His jaw clenched. But locking you up, that's a line. Then draw yours, she said. The man hesitated, torn between fear and conscience. Before he could answer, the leader's voice echoed down the hall, and he stepped back quickly, mask of neutrality restored. The night dragged into morning. The fluorescent lights never dimmed, denying even the illusion of rest. But Jasmine didn't close her eyes. Instead, she listened. Conversations half-whispered, the scrawl of names in logbooks, the shift changes that didn't match official schedules. Every detail was another thread, weaving the pattern of corruption she already suspected. By dawn, the station buzzed with restless energy. The leader strutted through the hall, ordering men to stay sharp and keep her quiet. He carried himself like a man on borrowed time, trying to convince everyone, including himself, that control remained in his grip. Then came the sound of a door slamming open. Heavy steps echoed down the corridor, confident and fast. The officers straightened, their nervous chatter silenced. Jasmine already knew who it was before she saw him. The senior officer stepped into view, his badge gleaming in the harsh light. His expression was cold, his eyes sharp as they scanned the cells. When they landed on her, something hardened in his jaw. What the hell is this? His voice carried authority that filled the hallway. The leader stiffened. Routine arrest. She was interfering with... Routine? The senior officer's tone was deadly. He stepped closer, his glare pinning the leader like a nail. You brought a sitting senator into this station in cuffs? Without evidence? Without notifying command? The silence was suffocating. No one dared to breathe. Jasmine stepped forward, her hands still bound, her voice calm but edged with steel. Good morning, Captain. I see you found me right where they wanted me. The senior officer's gaze shifted to her, and for a brief second, his sternness softened into something else. Recognition. Then he turned back to the leader. Unlock the cell. Now. The leader's face flushed. With respect, sir, she's a suspect. She's the head of a federal task force investigating the very corruption you're up to your neck in. The the senior officer snapped. You've just made the mistake of your career. A murmur rippled through the hall. The younger officers glanced at one another, realization dawning. The leader opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. For the first time that night, it was Jasmine who smiled. The trap he had laid for her had been sprung, but not on her, on him. The hallway had gone silent. Every officer stood frozen, eyes darting between the senior officer and their rattled leader. The man who had barked orders hours ago now looked like someone standing on a crumbling ledge, the ground disappearing beneath him. The senior officer's voice was low but razor-sharp. Unlock the cell. The leader's jaw clenched. Sir, now! Keys rattled in reluctant hands. The lock clicked, and the heavy door swung open. Jasmine stepped out, shoulders squared, wrists still marked red by the steel. The senior officer gestured, and another man rushed to remove the cuffs. The click of freedom echoed louder than any order that had been barked that night. She flexed her wrists, then raised her chin. Thank you, she said, her voice steady. Though I think we both know this isn't just about me. The senior officer nodded once, his eyes still pinned on the leader. Explain yourself. Every second you don't is another nail in your coffin. The leader straightened, trying to recover his bravado. She was interfering in an operation. I had reason to believe she was connected to... Don't finish that sentence, Jasmine interrupted. Her tone was calm, but the room leaned toward her as if drawn by gravity. You've lied enough tonight, and every lie you speak from this point forward will be entered into the record. The leader spun on her, his eyes burning with rage. You think you can walk in here, flash your title, and scare me? You don't know what you're dealing with. Oh, but I do, Jasmine said. Her words were precise, each one a hammer on the fragile structure he had built. I know about the falsified overtime slips. I know about the shipments moved under the guise of seized evidence. I know which storage lockers you've been using, which informants you've silenced, which judges you've paid off to keep warrants from touching your name. And I know that the officers standing behind you have begun to wonder whether protecting you is worth losing everything they swore to uphold. The hallway pulsed with tension. The younger officers glanced nervously at each other. One shifted his weight as if ready to step out of line. Another lowered his gaze entirely. The leader's voice cracked like a whip. Shut your mouths, all of you! Don't listen to this witch hunt! But his authority no longer carried the same weight. His words fell flat against the rising tide of truth. The senior officer stepped forward, his eyes locked on him. Enough! You've disgraced this badge long enough. Senator Hayes isn't your enemy. She's your reckoning, and you just handed her the rope to hang you with. The leader scoffed, desperate. You don't have proof. You've got stories, hunches, nothing that'll hold up. Jasmine reached into her blazer pocket, retrieving a small device no one had noticed in the chaos. She placed it on the desk with a quiet click. A recorder. Its red light blinked steadily. This, she said softly, has everything. The leader froze. I anticipated you'd try something like this, Jasmine continued. So I came prepared. Every word you spat tonight, every threat, every admission, it's all here. And it's going straight to the federal prosecutors waiting for me downtown. A collective gasp ran through the hallway. The younger officer, who had been nervous earlier, whispered, She recorded everything. The leader lunged for the device, but the senior officer's hands shot out, gripping his wrist with iron force. Not another move, he growled. The man's face flushed crimson, his composure unraveling. You don't get it. If I go down, half this department goes with me. Do you want that on your conscience? Jasmine stepped closer, her eyes cold. You think corruption spreads so far that no one will cut you loose? But you're wrong. When the choice is between saving themselves and saving you, they'll let you burn. For a moment, the leader looked around, as though seeking loyalty in the faces of his men. But what he found was hesitation, shame, and in some quiet relief. One by one, their silence spoke louder than allegiance ever could. The senior officer pulled out his cuffs. "You're under arrest for obstruction, misconduct, and conspiracy to traffic narcotics under the color of law." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had paraded a senator in cuffs only hours ago was now being shackled by the very system he thought he owned. The click of metal around his wrist was a sound no one in that building would ever forget. He thrashed once, eyes wild. "You can't do this! You don't know who I work for!" Jasmine leaned in, her voice quiet but deadly. "Oh, I know. And by the time the sun sets, so will the rest of the world." The senior officer nodded to the others. "Take him to holding." Two men stepped forward. They didn't hesitate. As the leader was dragged away, his curses echoing down the corridor, Jasmine turned to the officers who remained. Her voice was steady, resolute. "This isn't just about one man. It's about a culture that allowed him to thrive. You all have a choice. Continue down his path, or take the harder road, the one that cleanses this department of the rot he represents." No one spoke, but she saw it in their faces. The weight of guilt, the glimmer of hope, the flicker of courage long suppressed. The senior officer placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've just blown this wide open." She nodded. "And it's only the beginning." Because the real war wasn't won in that hallway. It would be fought in courts, in headlines, in the hearts of citizens who needed to believe that justice still meant something. But tonight the tables had turned. The predator had been unmasked, and the woman he tried to destroy stood taller than ever. The precinct's old conference room was dim, its blinds drawn tight, the air heavy with the weight of secrets long suppressed. Jasmine sat at the scarred wooden table, her wrists free at last, though the red marks from the cuffs pulsed like fresh reminders. Across from her, the senior officer dropped a battered file box onto the table with a hollow thud. "This," he said, his voice low, "is what we were never supposed to find." The lid lifted with a squeal of metal, revealing files stacked thick, papers yellowing at the edges, some dog-eared, some marked closed in bold red ink. Jasmine reached inside and pulled one free. Her eyes moved over the first page. Complaint, unlawful search and detention. Name, Marcus Hill. Age, 19. College sophomore. The words blurred into the photograph stapled at the top. A young black man, his lips split, eyes swollen, staring into the camera with the flat gaze of someone who had already learned that the system didn't believe him. She read aloud, her voice tight. Stopped for a broken taillight. Officer claimed to find narcotics in his backpack. Hill alleged the drugs were planted. Case dismissed when evidence went missing from lockup. She looked up. "And the officer of record," the senior officer nodded grimly, "the same one who put you in cuffs tonight." Jasmine set the file down with deliberate care, though her pulse hammered. She pulled another. Tanya Lewis, age 32, arrested for resisting, charges dropped, complaint filed, excessive force, intimidation. Attached was a grainy photo of bruises spiraling around a woman's wrists. She asked why she was being stopped, the senior officer said quietly. He called it resisting. Kept her overnight, no charges. Her complaint? Lost in the shuffle. Jasmine's jaw tightened. Not lost, buried. One by one she lifted more files, each one heavier than the last. David Johnson, age 45, construction worker, accused of DUI, blood test showed 0 alcohol, case thrown out. Carla Rivera, age 23, arrested for possession, charges dropped, drugs disappeared from evidence. Isaiah White, age 17, punched during a stop, charged with assaulting an officer, complaint dismissed. Each file was a wound, each face a scar on the badge. The senior officer leaned forward, voice thick. We counted 23 complaints tied to him directly. Not one stuck, not one made it past internal affairs. And every time the witnesses were discredited, the evidence a lost, or the victims too scared to push further. Jasmine's fingers brushed the stack. How did he survive this long? He hesitated. Because every time someone tried to bring it forward, the system swallowed it. friends upstairs, judges who owed favors, and I'll admit it, fear. Good men looked the other way because they thought fighting it meant losing everything. Her eyes burned. And how many lives paid for that silence? The room went still. Moments later, the door creaked open. A young officer with tired eyes stepped inside, clutching a notepad. He looked at Jasmine, then at the files. Some of them, they're here. Jasmine straightened. Here, he nodded nervously. The families, some of the ones who kept speaking, even when no one listened. They came when they heard what happened tonight, said they'd wait in the lobby. The senior officer exchanged a glance with Jasmine. Do you want to see them now? She didn't hesitate. Yes. The precinct lobby was a storm contained in 4 walls. Men and women, some young, some aged by years of struggle, filled the chairs and pressed against the walls. They looked weary, guarded, but their eyes sharpened as Jasmine stepped in. A woman rose first, mid-30s, thin, with determination carved into her face. She held a folder tight against her chest. Tanya Lewis, she introduced herself, voice trembling but firm. I heard what happened to you, and I wanted to say, you're not the first. She opened the folder, pulling out a copy of her old complaint. The ink faded, but her words still clear. They called me a liar, said I resisted, but all I did was ask why I was being stopped. He twisted my wrist until it bruised, then locked me up overnight. When I tried to fight back with paperwork, the file disappeared. Just gone. Her voice cracked, but she held her ground. I thought maybe it was just me, but then I heard about Marcus, about Carla, about Isaiah. We all thought we were alone. A young man stepped forward then, his voice hoarse. Marcus Hill, he said simply. His face was older than the 19-year-old in the photograph, but the scars of that night were still written in his expression. He planted that bag in my backpack. I swore it wasn't mine. My professors, my family, they all looked at me like I was lying, and then just like that, the drugs disappeared. Case dismissed, but my life was wrecked. Scholarships gone, my name dragged. People still look at me like I got away with something. His fists clenched at his sides. He took more from me than one night in a cell. He stole my future. The lobby was silent. Every word carried weight, falling like stone into water. Others spoke, one after another. A father whose teenage son had been beaten and charged with assault for shielding his little sister during a stop. A grandmother who remembered bailing her grandson out after a false DUI, watching him lose his license and his job even after the case was dismissed. Each voice built the case higher, louder, undeniable. Finally, Jasmine spoke, her voice cutting through the swell. You were never alone. They made you believe you were, because isolation is the strongest weapon corruption has. But tonight, that weapon breaks. She turned to the senior officer, who stood at her side, his expression grim but resolute. These stories, these files, they will not stay in shadows any longer. We'll take every page, every testimony, every scar, and we'll place them under the brightest light this city has ever seen. He nodded. Federal prosecutors will have it by morning. Internal affairs won't be able to bury it this time. Too many eyes will be watching. A murmur of cautious hope rippled through the crowd. For the first time, some of them stood taller. Jasmine raised her voice, steady, commanding. This isn't just about punishing one man. It's about reclaiming trust. It's about proving that the badge can mean honor again. And it starts with your courage. You came here. You spoke. Now the world will hear you. Silence, then Tanya Lewis stepped forward again. She extended her folder to Jasmine, her hand trembling but sure. Take it. All of it. If they wouldn't listen to me then, maybe they'll listen to you now. Jasmine accepted it with both hands, her grip firm. They will. I promise you. In that moment, the lobby was no longer just a waiting room in a precinct. It was a courtroom, a stage, a battlefield where the first real victory had already been won, not with handcuffs or warrants, but with truth, spoken out loud and finally heard. By mid-morning, the courthouse steps looked like a war zone of flashing bulbs and raised microphones. Reporters crowded the barricades, voices overlapping in a frenzy. "Senator Hayes, is it true you were arrested last night? Do you have proof of corruption in the department? Is this political theater or a real investigation?" The senior officer walked ahead, clearing a path through the press with a sweep of his arm. Jasmine followed, flanked not just by aides and federal agents, but by the faces from the precinct lobby, the people whose names had been buried in dusty files. Tanya Lewis stood tall, her bruised wrist photograph now enlarged on a placard. Marcus Hill held his old student ID, a silent reminder of the future he had been robbed of. The microphones lunged forward as Jasmine reached the podium. She adjusted it calmly, letting the noise build, then raised her hand. Silence spread like a tide. Her voice rang clear. "Yes, I was arrested last night. I was handcuffed, humiliated, paraded through a precinct like a criminal. But that arrest was never about justice. It was about silencing me, silencing all of us." The crowd leaned in. She held up a thick folder, its edges stuffed with documents. "This is the file they buried. 23 complaints against the same officer. Everyone dismissed, every victim ignored, every lie covered by the shield of a badge." She opened the folder and lifted a page. Marcus Hill, 19 years old. Drugs planted in his backpack. Evidence disappeared. Case dismissed. But his scholarship's gone. His future stolen. Marcus stepped forward, standing beside her. Flashbulbs lit his face. Next, Tanya Lewis, arrested for resisting. No charges filed. Her complaint disappeared. But her bruises remained. Tanya raised her arm, displaying the faded marks, the cameras capturing every detail. Jasmine's voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. "And there are more. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, all targeted, all silenced, not because of crimes they committed, but because of the color of their skin." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The words racial profiling and systemic corruption flew from reporter to reporter like sparks in dry grass. The senior officer stepped up beside her, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. "As of this morning, the officer responsible has been taken into federal custody. He is facing charges of obstruction, trafficking, conspiracy, and now, civil rights violations. This department will be purged of the rot that protected him. That is my pledge." The microphone surged forward again. "Senator, are you saying the police department has been covering up racist targeting for years? Do you believe other officers are complicit? What's next?" Jasmine leaned into the podium, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, not dodging the questions, but owning them. "I am saying this. Corruption thrives in silence. Racism thrives in silence. False accusations thrive in silence. And silence ends today. These families stood alone for years. No more. Their voices are my voice, and their truth is this city's truth. We will not look away again." Applause broke from behind the barricades. Community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens who had gathered, their cheers rising above the press frenzy. Jasmine raised her chin. "I was locked in a cell last night, told I was powerless. But here I stand, not powerless, not broken, and neither are the people you see behind me. Together we are turning the tables, and this city, this country, will have to choose. Protect corruption or protect justice. There is no middle ground." The flash of cameras was relentless, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She stepped back from the podium, gesturing for Tanya and Marcus to stand fully beside her. The image, Senator Hayes flanked by survivors, files in her hand, the badge of the senior officer gleaming, was one that would run on every front page by morning. And in that moment, the false accusations, the buried complaints, the years of silence, they no longer belonged to the shadows. They belonged to the light. The courthouse was full long before the first gavel struck. People had traveled from neighboring cities, lining the marble steps outside, pressing against the barricades just to catch a glimpse of what was unfolding inside. Journalists carried cameras and notepads, lenses clicking, microphones thrust forward at every official who walked by. But within the courtroom itself, a heavier silence ruled, a silence carved from anticipation, fear, and the thin edge of hope. Jasmine Hayes sat at the prosecution's table, her posture steady, her presence undeniable. She was not here as a senator, not merely as a public servant, but as someone who had been dragged in cuffs through the very system now standing trial. Beside her, federal prosecutors shuffled documents, but it was clear who carried the weight of the room. At the opposite table, the disgraced police leader sat rigid, his uniform traded for a plain suit that looked foreign on him. His jaw clenched, his eyes darted from the jury to the gallery, never resting long enough to look strong. He had once commanded entire squads with the snap of his voice. Now he was one man against the tide. The judge entered, robes flowing, voice firm. Court is now in session. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, today we will show that the defendant abused the authority of his badge, manipulated the justice system for profit, and targeted vulnerable communities with deliberate cruelty. We will prove that his actions were not mistakes of judgment, but patterns of corruption and racism that destroyed lives. The jury listened intently. Jasmine scanned their faces, noting their tight jaws, their narrowed eyes. Some looked angry already, some looked weary, but none looked indifferent. The defense attorney stood next, a sharp-suited man whose voice carried practiced confidence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client is a decorated officer. His record includes commendations, arrests, and years of service. What the prosecution calls corruption, we call the messy, complicated work of policing. Do not let emotions cloud your judgment. Look at the facts, and the fact is, this man was doing his job. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Jasmine's lips tightened. She knew their strategy. Cast doubt, blur the truth, and hope the jury mistook smoke for shadows. The first witness was called, Marcus Johnson, the man whose life had been derailed by a false drug charge. He stepped to the stand, his frame lean, his eyes steady but heavy with memory. He raised his hand, swore the oath, and sat down. The prosecutor began. Mr. Johnson, can you tell the court what happened the night you were arrested? Marcus nodded slowly. It was 3 years ago. I was walking home from my shift at the factory. I didn't have a car back then, couldn't afford one. A squad car pulled up, lights flashing. 2 officers got out. One of them was him. He pointed at the defendant. They said they had reason to believe I was carrying drugs. I told them to search me. I had nothing to hide. But then, his voice cracked slightly. Then they pulled a bag from my jacket pocket, a bag I had never seen before. The prosecutor leaned forward. You're saying they planted the evidence? Yes, Marcus said firmly. And I know how crazy that sounds, but I swear on my life, it wasn't mine. Didn't matter. I was cuffed right there on the sidewalk. My mother came out screaming from our porch. Neighbors, too. They watched me get shoved into that car like I was some criminal. The courtroom was silent. Jasmine could feel the air shift, the jury hanging on every word. Marcus continued. I spent 18 months behind bars before my case was dropped. 18 months. Lost my job. Lost my apartment. My little girl didn't recognize me when I got out. And when I tried to complain, when I tried to say the officer planted it, they laughed in my face, told me nobody would believe me over him. He turned his gaze back to the defendant, his voice low, trembling with contained rage. But they believe me now. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, but his questions fell flat. He asked about Marcus's employment record, his neighborhood, his past. Marcus stood his ground. By the time he stepped down, the jury had seen the crack in the defense's armor. Next came Tanya Williams, a teacher in her late 40s. She carried herself with dignity, but her eyes betrayed years of exhaustion. She described how her brother had been stopped repeatedly, harassed under the guise of routine checks, until one night he was arrested for resisting an officer. Resisting what? She demanded from the stand. Resisting being humiliated? Resisting being treated like he wasn't human? She pointed at the defendant. He knew what he was doing. He went after black men, especially the young ones. said they fit the profile. That was his phrase. The profile. You know what that means? It means he decided their guilt the moment he saw their skin. Her words hung heavy in the air. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably. One woman dabbed her eyes. The defense tried again, suggesting her testimony was emotional, not factual. Tanya met him with steel. The facts are in the arrest records. You can dress them up however you want. But when 90% of the people you drag into this courthouse look the same, that's not policing. That's targeting. Witness after witness followed. Former officers testified under immunity deals, admitting they'd been pressured into falsifying reports, into looking the other way when evidence was mishandled. One described how overtime pay was padded through fake stakeouts. Another confessed that seized drugs were mysteriously resold back onto the streets. Each admission chipped away at the defense until the defendant himself sat like a shadow of the man he once projected. Then it was Jasmine's turn. She rose slowly, her presence filling the room, before she even spoke. When she took the stand, she did not sit like a politician. She sat like a woman who had been dragged through fire and returned sharper for it. The prosecutor asked gently, "Senator Hayes, would you describe the events leading to your arrest?" Her eyes swept across the courtroom, then settled on the jury. "I was stopped for no reason, searched without cause, cuffed without evidence, accused of carrying drugs I never possessed. I was booked, fingerprinted, locked in a cell overnight. And why? Because I got too close. Because I was leading a federal investigation into corruption, and they thought they could discredit me the same way they've discredited countless others." Her voice did not shake. "The difference is I had the resources to fight back. I had the platform to be heard. But Marcus didn't. Tanya's brother didn't. Hundreds of others didn't. They didn't want me silenced because of who I am. They wanted me silenced because I might finally shine a light on what they'd been doing to people without voices for years." The prosecutor let the silence linger before asking, "Senator Hayes, what do you believe this case is about?" Jasmine looked directly at the jury. "It's about more than one man in uniform. It's about the culture that protected him, the silence that enabled him, the excuses that justified him. If justice means anything, it must mean accountability. Not just for the powerless, but for the powerful. Not just for the people in the streets, but for the people in these badges and robes. This isn't about vengeance. This is about truth. And truth doesn't care how many years of service he has on his record. It cares what he did with them." The courtroom was electric. Even the judge shifted slightly, as though the words carried a weight beyond the case itself. The defense attorney tried to rattle her with questions, suggesting she was grandstanding, implying she exaggerated. But Jasmine's answers were calm, precise, unshakable. She left the stand not as a witness, but as the undeniable moral center of the trial. Closing arguments came. The prosecution painted a picture of systemic abuse, of deliberate corruption masked as law enforcement. They replayed Jasmine's recording, the defendant's threats echoing through the courtroom like ghosts that refused to be buried. The defense clung to procedure, to technicalities, to the notion that good officers sometimes make mistakes. But no one in the room seemed convinced anymore. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the tension was unbearable. Hours passed, reporters refreshed their feeds, families whispered prayers. Jasmine sat still, hands folded, her eyes closed as though gathering every ounce of strength. Finally, the jury returned. The foreperson stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." The words crashed like thunder. Gasps, sobs, cheers muffled quickly by the bailiff's call for order. The defendant's face drained of color, his jaw slack. For the first time in years, he was powerless. The judge's gavel struck. "This court finds you guilty of conspiracy, corruption, falsification of evidence, and racial misconduct under the color of law. Sentencing will be scheduled. Court is adjourned." The gallery erupted. Victims embraced. Reporters scrambled. Cameras flashed. Jasmine rose, steady amid the chaos. She looked at Marcus, at Tanya, at the faces of so many who had carried pain in silence. For once, their voices had been heard in the highest chambers of justice. Outside the courthouse, Microphones waited, questions firing from every direction. Jasmine stepped before them, her voice clear. Today was not the end. Today was the beginning. One man has been held accountable, but the system that allowed him to thrive remains. We will not stop at one verdict. We will push for oversight, for reform, for justice that does not depend on privilege. And to every person who has ever been silenced, I say this: we hear you now, and we will not let you be forgotten. The crowd roared. Some wept openly. Others raised fists in solidarity. The cameras captured it all, but Jasmine was not speaking for the cameras. She was speaking for history. As the sun dipped low behind the courthouse, she felt the weight of the battle still ahead. This was one victory, but the war for justice, dignity, and truth, for Marcus, for Tanya, for countless names etched in silence, was only just beginning. The courthouse steps had emptied hours ago, but the city had not gone quiet. Across neighborhoods, television screens replayed the verdict, radio stations carried sound bites of Jasmine's words, and social media pulsed with hashtags calling for change. For the first time in years, the story wasn't about fear. It was about accountability. In her office that night, Jasmine sat with stacks of files spread across her desk. The victory was fresh, but she knew it could fade quickly if not cemented into law. Her phone buzzed nonstop, messages from allies, from victims, from strangers who just wanted to say thank you. She answered none of them yet. Instead, she studied the list of cases tied to the corrupt officer. Names, dates, charges. So many lives derailed, so many voices never given space. A knock sounded at the door. The senior officer, the one who had intervened at the station, stepped in. His uniform seemed heavier now, weighed down by what he had helped expose. "You did it," he said quietly. Jasmine looked up. "No, we did it, and now we have to do more." He nodded, stepping closer. "The department's in chaos, half the precinct's under review. Some are scared, some are angry, but some are relieved. They think maybe it's finally changing." "Good," Jasmine said. "That fear, that anger, that relief. They're proof the system isn't untouchable anymore. But this can't just be about one precinct. We need oversight at every level, transparency, independent review boards, body cams that can't be switched off when convenient. And we need the courage to enforce them." The officer studied her. "You think people are ready for that?" She leaned back, eyes steady. "It doesn't matter if they're ready. It matters that it's necessary." The next morning, Jasmine stood before Congress. The chamber buzzed with tension, supporters eager to act, opponents bristling against what they called political theater. But when she spoke, the noise fell away. "We are not here to debate whether corruption exists. We are here because it has already destroyed lives. We are here because men in uniform planted drugs on citizens, falsified reports, and operated as criminals under the color of law. And we are here because for too long, the victims were ignored. Today I ask not for symbolic gestures, but for legislation that protects the powerless from the powerful. Independent oversight, transparency, and accountability are not luxuries. They are the bare minimum of justice." Some applauded, others frowned, but no one could deny the force of her words. In the weeks that followed, reforms began to move. Federal prosecutors reopened cases once dismissed. Local news ran features on men and women wrongfully accused. Officers once silent came forward with testimony. It was messy, painful, and slow. But it was happening. Marcus Johnson returned to work, this time as a community liaison for reentry programs, helping others who had been through what he had endured. Tanya's brother had his record cleared, his name restored after years of carrying the weight of a false charge. Families who had been fractured found the first threads of healing. And Jasmine, she carried the burden of leadership with unflinching resolve. She knew the fight was endless, knew that corruption never disappeared, only shifted. But she also knew the power of truth when spoken without fear. Months later, she stood at another podium, this time not in a courthouse, but in a crowded auditorium filled with young law students, activists, and aspiring public servants. They tried to silence me with handcuffs, she told them, but I am still here, and so are you. Remember this, power is never permanent. It belongs to those willing to use it for justice. If you take one lesson from my story, let it be this. Courage is contagious, and when enough of us stand, no system, no badge, no title can hold us down. The crowd rose to its feet. Applause thundered, not just for her, but for every unseen battle waged by those who refused to be broken. Outside, the night air was cool, the city lights stretching endlessly. Jasmine walked to her car surrounded by aides and supporters, but her gaze lingered upward toward the skyline. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "This is only the beginning." And she was right. Because the fight for justice does not end with one verdict, one law, or one leader. It lives in every act of defiance against corruption, in every voice raised against injustice, in every person who refuses to let the powerful decide the truth. The tables had turned once. They would turn again, and Jasmine Hayes would be there, ready. What would you do if corruption came for you? Stand silent or stand up? Comment your thoughts below. Share the story so it's never forgotten. Subscribe to see how truth, courage, and justice win every time.